self-determination, inner community work, why we need to build wealth for ourselves. It's going to be very important while we continue to fight this war. This is a war that we're in right now, an attack, while we continue to fight it. So thank you, Sister Roberts, for being here.
Thank you.
Good morning. I am so excited to be here, and I am so nervous to be here because my boss is Vanessa Hall Harper, city councilor, the one and only Black city councilor in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I have been working with Chambers of Commerce for almost 20 years here in Tulsa. I started as the receptionist at the Tulsa Regional Chamber. It's they call that the White Chamber, the big chamber here in Tulsa. I worked my way up into events. I did events planning. I learned how to write the publications, how to think about tourism. Then they promoted me into program manager for education, where I became someone who traveled around to all of the schools and really got to see what equity looks like in the classroom and in our schools and in North Tulsa in particular. And then I was promoted to Senior Vice President of Workforce Development, where I worked for many years with employers, trying to understand what they need from the workforce, where are the gaps, how we can help them make sure that they have the workforce that they need. And then one day I woke up and they said, you know what, you don't do any of that anymore. You're gonna be our SVP of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. And I was like, y'all gonna tokenize me, wow. The Black woman gotta do DEI. That just seems so fitting. But when I looked back at my career and the things I had done, I had the opportunity to see truly the connectivity of how diversity, equity, and inclusion is not just, sort of something we have to understand in the workplace. It's something we need to be invested in deeply from cradle all the way into career. And so I was like, why not me? And I left there after 5 years doing that role and joined a consulting firm, Arrowhead Consulting, where I did diversity, equity, inclusion consulting for chambers across the nation. I've worked in Sacramento, San Francisco, Texas, Northwest Arkansas, Des Moines, building equity dashboards, doing the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, and helping really, truly do the thing that I like to say is my job, making organizations have transformative shifts in their workplace culture and climate. So last June, Vanessa Hall Harper reached out to me as I was just being a partner in my consulting firm and said there was a need for the chamber to have a leader, someone that understood how to do this work. And she asked me to take the helm of the Black Wall Street Chamber. There are two in this community. There is the Greenwood Chamber. It actually is the chamber that handles the vendors on the street. They serve those vendors there. I like to see our chamber serving everyone else across the city, and of course our entrepreneurs right here on Greenwood. You all, this was a heavy role for me because I describe myself as a child of Tulsa, a daughter of Tulsa. And for many years, when I was working at the Tulsa Regional Chamber, I was probably enemy number one to Vanessa and many others because they didn't understand the fact that I had a role in a big oppressive system. But my outcome was the same as theirs. I wanted the best for my community. I was born and raised here just like everybody else. So there's a moment of pride when your city councilor you've been on the other side maybe arguing with about what reparation means, what repair means, how to describe those words to big corporate boardrooms and some of these people that I get to sit with. To many white people, that just means checks. They don't know what repair truly means. And so what I would always tell Vanessa is there has to be someone sitting at those tables trying to explain it. I'm not trying to say it's not necessary. I'm not trying to say accountability is not required. I'm just trying to say that we have to be able to explain to them what they've done to us in a way that they hear it and become co-conspirators in the solution. People fund solutions, not problems. And I work in chamber and I'm about funding solutions. So today what I'm going to do is a workshop that I do across the nation for corporate events, but particularly for chamber leaders across the city. I just left Madison, Wisconsin, where I spoke to about 160 chamber and association leaders from the Hospitality Association to the Cement Association to chambers across the nation. And what I wanted to share with that is more connects us and separates us. That's truly the message of any presentation that I'm doing, is more connects us and separates us. If we can start there, I believe that the intersection between the work that you all do while you're here and the work that I do and why I'm here, that's where we can have the most impact, is if we just realize that those are very true statements. So one of the exercises that I do is called Cross the Line. How many of you have ever done a privilege walk?
Yeah.
Couple of hands. Tell me, what was it like when you did a privilege walk?
Interesting to see other people's spaces and places.
Yeah, so what she's saying is that everyone's asked to kind of line up on a line, and they ask a bunch of questions, and based on the amount of privilege you have, you take a step forward, and you take a step forward. And what I found when I've done the privilege walks is all the difference, all the blackness, all the difference, all the disabilities, all the people that have something wrong with them according to society, we're in the back. And white people, or people that identify as white, could just walk clear to Bartlesville based on how much privilege they have. I like to do something that's a little bit different that I think showcases the diversity just amongst even us, a very homogenous group. I've never spoken to this many black people. I'm normally speaking to majority white audiences, so this is really fabulous. But it's called Cross the Line. And before we get into it, I just want to describe some of the ground rules about Cross the Line. Typically, I would have us all stand up, and we would go stand in a line, but we won't do that today. I'm just going to ask you to grab something near you that you can kind of hold up. Just something that in answering the question, you can hold it up for me when I ask the question, okay? And what I want you to do is listen. You don't have to say anything. You're never going to have to actually verbally say a word, but you're going to answer by holding up whatever you have near you when I ask the question, if it applies to you. And you're going to look around. This is an opportunity for us to look at each other. We never get to stop the hamster wheel long enough to actually pay attention to each other. This is the space to do that today. So I'll ask you to look around. Look who's with you, who's not. I also want you to respect the process, because I'll ask you questions that you'll answer that might be a little embarrassing to you. And I want you to respect, the people that you're seeing also answer by not going and saying, hey, I saw so-and-so answer this way. Go to that person and say, I noticed you responded this way. I want to know more about that. Use it to get curious about who you're here with today, okay? And then typically there's a gray area. And so we're going to use the gray area that if you're answering the question, it's a bold yes, hand up as high as you can. But if it's a halfway, kind of applies to you, then use the gray space, okay? And then lastly, we're going to try to do this in silence, which should be easy. But the silence is really something that weirds people out. They don't like to be silent, but I want us to try to do this in silence in this very, very reverent place, because I think it's important that we just take a moment to listen, respect, and understand that life has a lot of gray areas. So I'll ask the question, I can repeat the question, but I cannot interpret the question for you. So you can have me repeat it as many times as you need. We'll go pretty quick. Rapid fire, it's about 50 questions. Are y'all ready? Are there any questions about what we're gonna do? Okay. I want you to really kind of turn and make sure that you're looking at each other as much as possible. Okay, the first question. If you are left-handed, would you please raise it? Okay, raise it high. Look around, please, everyone. Look around. Notice who's with you and who's not. You may lower your hand. If you like to hunt or fish, would you raise your hand? Hands high. Look around, there's a lot of people. I didn't know black folks did that. You can put your hand down. If you have or had grandparents who speak a language other than English, would you raise your hand? Notice who's with you and who isn't. Put your hand down. If you grew up outside of the United States, would you raise your hand? Raise your hand high. One. Thank you. If the history of your ancestors was taught in school, would you raise your hand? Notice who's with you and who isn't. In school, doesn't say specifically. Okay, you can put your hand down. If you ever had to skip meals or go hungry when you were growing up, would you raise your hand? Notice who's with you and who isn't. You can put your hand down. If you've had one or more of your parents pass away, raise your hand. Yes. Notice who's with you. You can put it down. If you have visited 2 or more countries outside of the U.S., would you raise your hand? Wow, a lot of travel. Wonderful. Put your hand down. If you've ever been able to leverage a friendship or a family connection that helps you land a job, would you raise your hand? You can put your hand down. If you feel you have to work twice as hard to get half as far as others, would you raise your hand? Notice who's with you. You can put your hand down. If you served in the military, would you raise your hand? Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you for your service. All in the military. If you have a college degree, would you raise your hand? You can put your hands down. If you speak a language fluently other than English, would you raise a hand? Thank you. If someone you love has a mental disability, would you raise your hand? Yes. Thank you. You can put your hand down. If, as an adult, you have ever stood up for someone who was being bullied, harassed, or made fun of, would you raise your hand? Yes. Look at who's with you and who is not. You can put your hand down. If you live in a neighborhood where most of the people look like you, would you raise your hand? Notice who's with you and who isn't. Put your hand down. If you've never invited someone of a different race or ethnicity into your home, would you raise your hand? Thank you. You can put it down. If you have ever been made to feel less than because of your appearance, would you raise your hand? You can put your hand down. If you are not comfortable sharing your faith or beliefs with your coworkers or people that you're in constant contact with, would you raise your hand? Notice who's with you. You can put your hand down. If you have a friend or family member who has or is currently serving time in prison, would you raise your hand? You can put your hand down. If you've chosen to remain silent on issues of importance to you as a woman, for fear of being seen as overly sensitive, difficult to work with, or labeled the B word, would you raise your hand? Raise them high. Yeah, you can put them down now. If you grew up in an environment where you heard that poor people were to blame for their own problems with poverty, crime, or violence, would you raise your hand? How many of us were told that? You can put your hand down. If you, a member of your family or a close friend, is gay, lesbian, bisexual, or asexual, would you raise your hand? You can put your hand down. If you felt that others don't really want to hear your concerns, questions, or confusion about the meaning of DEI or reparations and just want you to be politically correct, would you raise your hand?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. If you've ever felt that others don't really want to hear your questions, concerns, or confusions about diversity and inclusion, or perhaps reparations, and they just want you to be politically correct, would you raise your hand? You can put your hand down. If you hold political beliefs that are not held by the majority of people that you come in contact with, would you raise your hand? You can put your hand down. And lastly, if you were told or realized you had to change the grammar, vocabulary, or way of speaking you learned as a child in order to be seen as intelligent, would you raise your hand? Yes. Put your hand down. And if you've ever been told to go back to the country you came from, would you raise your hand? Yes. Okay, put your hand down. So what I'd love for you all to do is just take a little bit of time to understand, just with each other, what was it like to introduce yourselves to each other in that way? Sort of raising your hand. What did it feel like to go through that? Did you find yourself making judgments of others? Were you shocked when other people raised their hand that maybe you had assumptions of who they were? And then what connections can you draw from the exercise about the work that you're doing, the work that we're trying to do together? So let's just take a few minutes, like maybe 7 or 8 minutes, and just talk amongst yourselves for a moment.
Play some lovely music.